Right now, as you're conducting business, making investments, or even buying groceries, you're participating in the most sophisticated weapon system ever created. If you've ever wondered why the US dollar is so powerful, or how countries manipulate currency to control other nations, you're about to discover the invisible battlefield where monetary systems become weapons of mass economic destruction. The United States has spent 7 decades building the most powerful economic weapon in human history: dollar dominance and reserve currency control. Through this system, America can effectively tax every international transaction, fund unlimited deficits by exporting inflation, and economically isolate entire nations with the stroke of a pen. Meanwhile, competitors like China, Russia, and the European Union are developing counterweapons to break free from dollar control and replace the US dollar as the world's dominant currency. This isn't monetary policy, this is strategic warfare where central bank policy becomes weapons deployment, and currency manipulation destroys entire economies. In this War Room briefing, you'll discover how the dollar weapon system actually operates, examine the historical battles that established monetary dominance, analyze current currency wars reshaping global power, understand the strategic counterweapons being deployed against dollar hegemony, and learn how these invisible battles directly impact your investments, career security, and financial future. Currency warfare operates through 4 primary weapon systems that demonstrate why the US dollar is so powerful, and how central bank policy becomes a tool of international control. Understanding how currencies work at this strategic level is crucial for anyone making economic decisions. The first weapon is reserve currency status, and what economists call US dollar hegemony. When a nation's currency becomes the global reserve, it gains exorbitant privilege, the ability to print money and have other countries accept it as payment. The United States holds roughly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, meaning central banks worldwide must hold dollars to conduct international business. This reserve currency system creates automatic demand for dollars regardless of US economic performance, explaining why the dollar remains so powerful even during American economic challenges. The second weapon is transaction network control through currency manipulation tactics. The dollar dominates international trade settlement, with approximately 85% of all foreign exchange transactions involving dollars. When a German company buys Japanese goods, central bank policy in both countries requires them to settle in dollars, not euros or yen. This forces every major economy to maintain dollar reserves and creates dependency on US financial infrastructure. A key reason why countries want to replace the US dollar with alternative systems. The third weapon is debt denomination power. Global debt markets are overwhelmingly dollar-denominated, totaling over $13 trillion. When countries, corporations, or individuals borrow in dollars, they become vulnerable to US monetary policy. Federal Reserve decisions about interest rates directly impact debt service costs for borrowers worldwide, giving Washington leverage over foreign economic decisions. The fourth weapon is financial infrastructure control. The SWIFT banking system, dominated by US and European banks, processes over 150 million messages daily for international transactions. Countries excluded from SWIFT face economic isolation comparable to being banned from the global internet. Combined with dollar clearing requirements, this creates a choke point that America can weaponize against adversaries. These weapon systems work synergistically. Reserve currency status creates transaction demand, which reinforces debt market dominance, which strengthens infrastructure control. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that becomes extremely difficult to challenge once established. Understanding today's currency warfare requires examining the strategic battles that established current power structures. These historical campaigns demonstrate how monetary weapons are deployed, and the devastating consequences for those who lose. The foundational battle was Bretton Woods in 1944. While marketed as international cooperation, this conference was actually an American economic conquest. By making the dollar the only currency directly convertible to gold, the United States forced all international trade to flow through dollar-based systems. Britain, despite being America's wartime ally, saw the pound sterling displaced as the global reserve currency. This wasn't negotiation, it was strategic economic subordination disguised as monetary reform. The Nixon shock of 1971 demonstrated currency weaponization in action. When gold backing became inconvenient for financing Vietnam War spending, President Nixon unilaterally ended dollar-gold convertibility. Foreign countries holding dollars as reserves suddenly found their wealth backed by nothing but American promises. France's Charles de Gaulle called it America's exorbitant privilege. But there was nothing other nations could do. The United States had weaponized the global monetary system. The Plaza Accord of 1985 shows how currency weapons destroy even allied economies. When Japan's manufacturing prowess began threatening American industrial dominance, the United States forced Japan to accept massive yen appreciation through coordinated central bank intervention. The yen strengthened from 240 to 120 per dollar within 2 years, effectively doubling the cost of Japanese exports. This currency manipulation contributed directly to Japan's economic stagnation that lasted decades. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 demonstrated currency warfare through speculative attack. International hedge funds, primarily based in the United States and Europe, systematically attacked Asian currencies using short-selling strategies. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea saw their currencies collapse by 50 to 80%, triggering massive economic contraction. The IMF rescue packages came with conditions that opened these economies to American corporate penetration. Currency warfare created the crisis, then the United States profited from the reconstruction. More recently, the 2014 sanctions against Russia revealed the ultimate expression of currency weaponization. By excluding Russian banks from dollar-based systems and freezing central bank reserves, the United States demonstrated that holding dollars provides no protection if America decides to weaponize the financial system. This wasn't traditional warfare, it was economic strangulation through monetary control. Today's currency battlefield reveals systematic efforts by major powers to break free from US dollar hegemony, with multiple nations deploying sophisticated monetary weapons, while building defensive systems against American currency manipulation. China's currency strategy represents the most systematic challenge to understand what happens if the dollar loses reserve status. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China is systematically expanding UN usage in bilateral trade agreements, demonstrating how countries manipulate currency policy for geopolitical advantage. The China-Russia energy trade, worth over $140 billion annually, now settles primarily in yuan and rubles, bypassing dollar systems entirely, and showing other nations that alternatives to dollar dominance are possible. China's central bank has established currency swap agreements with over 40 countries, creating alternative payment networks that reduce dollar dependency. The digital yuan represents China's most advanced currency weapon in the battle over what happens if the dollar loses reserve status. Unlike cryptocurrencies, the digital yuan provides the Chinese government complete transaction visibility and control, while offering an alternative to traditional central bank policy mechanisms. By offering this digital currency versus US dollar system to Belt and Road partners, China is building a surveillance-capable monetary network that could eventually rival SWIFT and demonstrate how digital currencies work as tools of economic control. Early adoption in countries like Cambodia and the UAE demonstrates how digital currency becomes a tool for economic influence projection. Russia's response to currency weaponization shows how targeted nations adapt. After 2014 sanctions, Russia systematically reduced dollar reserves from 46% to 16% of total holdings, replacing them with gold, euros, and yuan. The creation of SPFS, Russia's alternative to SWIFT, processes over 2 million messages monthly and connects to banks in 20 countries. When Western sanctions escalated in 2022, Russia was partially insulated because it had built alternative monetary infrastructure. The European Union's strategy reveals how allied nations seek independence from dollar control. The Instex system, designed to facilitate trade with Iran despite US sanctions, demonstrates European willingness to challenge American monetary dominance when strategic interests conflict. The Digital Euro project, currently in development, aims to provide Europeans with a sovereign digital currency independent of US-controlled systems. Saudi Arabia's monetary pivot signals potential transformation of what economists call the petrodollar system explained. The petrodollar system, established in the 1970s, required oil purchases in dollars, creating massive demand for US currency, and reinforcing why the US dollar became so powerful. Saudi Arabia's recent agreements to accept yuan for oil sales to China and discussions about euro-denominated transactions with Europe, suggest this foundational pillar of US dollar hegemony may be weakening as countries actively work to replace the US dollar in energy markets. Central bank digital currencies are emerging as the next-generation currency weapons. Over 100 countries are researching or developing CBDCs, with China leading implementation and the United States studying defensive responses. These systems provide governments unprecedented control over monetary transactions, while potentially reducing dependence on existing dollar-based infrastructure. As dollar weaponization becomes more aggressive, targeted nations are developing increasingly sophisticated counterweapons, designed to neutralize American monetary dominance. The most significant counterweapon is alternative payment system development. Russia's SPFS now processes transactions for banks in Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. China's CIPS system handles over $3.5 trillion in annual transactions and connects to banks in 100 countries. Iran's CPAM system facilitates trade with regional partners. These networks create redundancy that reduces SWIFT dependence and limits American sanctions' effectiveness. Commodity-backed currency initiatives represent another strategic response. Russia has proposed gold-backed trading mechanisms for BRICS nations, potentially creating a stable value store independent of fiat currency manipulation. China's oil futures contracts, denominated in yuan and convertible to gold, provide energy traders an alternative to dollar-denominated benchmarks. These systems aim to restore commodity backing that eliminates the inflation export capabilities of fiat currency systems. Regional currency unions are emerging as defensive structures against external monetary pressure. The ASEAN nations are exploring common settlement mechanisms for intra-regional trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area includes provisions for eventual monetary integration. The Eurasian Economic Union has discussed common currency possibilities. While still developmental, these initiatives aim to create economic blocs that can resist external currency manipulation. Cryptocurrency adoption by nation-states represents a wild card in currency warfare. El Salvador's Bitcoin adoption, while controversial, demonstrates how smaller nations might bypass traditional monetary systems entirely. Iran uses cryptocurrency mining to circumvent sanctions, generating billions in revenue outside dollar-controlled systems. Venezuela's Petro, despite limited success, shows authoritarian governments exploring monetary alternatives. Gold accumulation strategies reflect long-term planning for monetary system transition. Central banks globally purchased over 1,100 tons of gold in 2022, the highest level since 1967. Russia, China, Turkey, and India lead this accumulation, building reserves that provide alternatives to dollar-based wealth storage. This isn't investment, it's strategic preparation for potential monetary system collapse or transformation. Bilateral trade agreements increasingly specify non-dollar settlement requirements. The Russia-India rupee-ruble mechanism, China-Brazil yuan-real arrangements, and Iran-Turkey lira-real agreements all aim to reduce dollar transaction volume. While individually small, these agreements collectively represent systematic efforts to build alternative monetary networks. Currency warfare isn't abstract policy, it directly impacts your investment returns, career security, and purchasing power in ways most people never recognize. For investors, understanding currency warfare is essential for portfolio protection and opportunity identification. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, emerging market currencies typically weaken as capital flows back to dollar assets. The Turkish lira, Argentine peso, and Nigerian naira have all experienced dramatic devaluations following Fed policy changes. Investors holding emerging market assets or currencies face automatic losses not from local economic performance, but from American monetary policy decisions. Professional careers are increasingly vulnerable to currency warfare dynamics. The semiconductor industry exemplifies this vulnerability. Companies like TSMC face revenue fluctuations not just from demand changes, but from yuan-dollar exchange rate movements that affect production costs. Financial services professionals must understand how currency sanctions affect transaction processing and compliance requirements. Energy sector workers need awareness of how petrodollar system changes might affect oil pricing and investment flows. Real estate markets show direct currency warfare impacts that affect property values and investment returns. Chinese capital flight, driven partly by concerns about yuan devaluation, inflated property prices in Vancouver, Sydney, and Los Angeles, before government restrictions limited foreign investment. Russian sanctions in 2022 immediately affected luxury real estate markets in London, New York, and Miami, as sanctioned individuals faced asset freezes. Commodity investments require currency warfare awareness for strategic positioning. Gold prices typically rise during currency debasement periods as investors seek alternative stores of value. Agricultural commodities can benefit from currency devaluations in producing countries, while being hurt by import restrictions from consuming nations. Oil and gas investments face particular complexity, as pricing mechanisms shift between dollar, yuan, and euro denominations. Retirement planning must account for currency warfare's long-term effects on purchasing power and asset values. Americans benefit from dollar dominance through lower import costs and international investment advantages, but face risks if dollar hegemony weakens. Europeans must consider how euro-dollar dynamics affect their international purchasing power and travel costs. Emerging market residents face the greatest vulnerability, as their governments often cannot protect them from external currency manipulation. Small business operations increasingly encounter currency warfare through supply chain costs and payment processing restrictions. Companies importing from China face yuan-dollar volatility that affects inventory costs and pricing strategies. Businesses serving international customers must navigate payment system restrictions that can block transactions from sanctioned countries. Export companies must understand how currency appreciation affects their competitive positioning in international markets. Personal banking and payment systems face disruption as alternative networks develop. Credit card companies, money transfer services, and international banks all face pressure to adapt to multiple payment systems, rather than relying solely on dollar-based infrastructure. Understanding these changes helps individuals maintain financial access and avoid disruption during system transitions. Currency warfare represents the most sophisticated and consequential battle for global economic control in human history. The dollar weapon system that America built over 7 decades is now facing systematic challenges from nations that refuse to accept permanent monetary subordination. Understanding these dynamics isn't academic curiosity, it's essential intelligence for anyone making strategic decisions about investments, careers, or business operations. The strategic implications extend far beyond economics. Nations that control international monetary systems ultimately control global political and military power. China's systematic challenge to dollar dominance isn't just about trade convenience, it's about creating an alternative world order where Beijing, not Washington, sets the rules for international economic interaction. For business professionals, investors, and policymakers, currency warfare creates both unprecedented risks and opportunities. Those who understand how monetary weapons operate can position themselves to benefit from system transitions, while protecting against currency manipulation. Those who ignore these dynamics will find themselves casualties of wars they never saw coming. The next phase of currency warfare will likely determine whether the 21st century remains dominated by American economic power, or transitions to a multipolar monetary system with multiple competing currencies and payment networks. The nations and individuals who prepare for this transition will thrive, while those who assume current systems are permanent will face strategic obsolescence. The currency warfare intelligence you've received today is just the beginning of your strategic education. These fundamental warfare principles and strategic frameworks will remain relevant for decades as nations continue deploying monetary weapons in evolving ways. Subscribe to the Economic War Room for comprehensive strategic intelligence briefings that build your understanding of economic warfare fundamentals. Hit the notification bell to ensure you receive each new briefing in our systematic curriculum. Mastering these timeless principles gives you permanent strategic advantages that most investors and business leaders never acquire. In our next classified briefing, we'll examine trade wars and how countries use tariffs and trade policy as weapons of economic destruction. We'll analyze why trade wars always escalate, reveal the hidden costs that consumers never see, and show you how to position yourself before the next trade conflict devastates global supply chains. Remember, in currency warfare, information is ammunition and timing is everything. The strategic intelligence you've gained today provides you with capabilities most people lack. But only if you stay informed as these battles evolve.